present our wonderful instructor for the evening, Alden Groves. Give a round of applause, y'all.
All right, so kind of like I was talking about before we started really get into it, I want to cover two main things today. I want to cover some cool tricks for sound design, some cool things. Some of it is Ableton specific. A lot of it is cross-applicable to any DAW that you might use. But first and foremost, I want to cover a little trick that not a lot of people use or know about, and that is the 128 rack in Ableton, which is what I've got on my drum machine here. Basically what it allows me to do is I can load up into one drum rack slot 128 different samples for my kicks. And then instead of going into my browser, instead of scrolling through all of this and opening up different things, or even Command F and doing kick, you know, like that's still a lot to browse through. And especially if you're browsing through your sample folder, everyone knows that 99 out of 100 samples you listen to are going to be bad. They're not going to be useful to you. So what you can do, instead of every time you want to put a kick in a song, in a new song, instead of scrolling through your whole sample library, scrolling past a bunch of stuff you don't like, what you can do in Ableton is you can load you can find 128 samples that you do like, load them all into one sampler, nest that in a drum rack, and now, I'm actually just going to duplicate this so I can leave it as is. But let's say I don't love this kick. I can just, every single iteration of the knob, you can see I am changing the value of this knob. Different kick every time. And that is a super, super useful technique. A lot of what I am trying to do in the studio is make it so that I am out of my own way as much as possible. There's a lot of things that you shouldn't do, in my opinion, if you are working on a new song. You shouldn't spend 2 hours looking for all your samples. You shouldn't spend an hour trying to design a new sound. You shouldn't be wasting your time with administrative shit, basically. You know, it's like if you're trying to run a business, you don't start signing the paperwork after you open the doors. You get everything organized beforehand. And everyone's had the experience, right? If you go in, you've allocated X amount of hours to go into the studio to work on something, and you show up and you're like, I'm completely uninspired. I have not a good idea in my body right now. And you know, I've had the experience of going to a studio and having that situation where it's like, it's not just like I'm on my laptop in my house. I'm like, I booked time to be here. Now I'm here for 2 hours. A really good use of those 2 hours, if you're not feeling inspired, is working on organizing stuff. Setting up, in Ableton you can set up a template. You know, when I open up a new project, which I'll just do really quick to show you, because this will be the same when I come back.
Yeah, like
templates are really, really helpful. Because there's certain stuff I know I do every time, right? Like, I know I have a group that has my drum machines and drum loops in it. I know I have a group that contains synths. I'm pretty much always going to have a sub, so I might as well just have that loaded in. I often have vocals in my songs, so I have stuff that has basic processing just loaded in already, so that when it's time to record that, instead of making a new audio track, adding my vocal bus, getting the routing right, getting it set up, engaging record, it's just there. I just click and it's ready to go. So like with this drum machine thing, for example, I can just pop that open, I can put in a basic beat, and I just scroll until I find a kick I like. You can even...
So how did you get all those 128 samples in there to begin with?
So I will show you exactly that, my good friend. What you do is you make a new audio rack, or audio effect rack, and then you very patiently make 100 billion scenes. Although actually I think it will make the scenes for me. So what we're going to do is we are going to indiscriminately select just all of the kicks. And then you would drag them all like that. So we will cut everything that is above 128 because that is the maximum amount you can actually put in a sampler. then we will make a...
In the full version.
What?
In the full version, you can do 128, but in the standard version, it's less than that.
In a simpler, I don't know. But I know that in sampler, you can grab all these, drag them right here, boom. 128 of 128 samples are selected. Now you just pop this open, you right click here, and you click distribute ranges equally. What that does is it will take this slider, this slider up here, and it will assign one sample to each to each node. So you can see as you go down, each sample is assigned to a different thing, etc. and so forth. So then what you can do is you can put this in an instrument rack. You can go to this slider and you can assign it to a macro. And now, let's get our MIDI keyboard going. And then what you would do is you would just put this in a drum rack cell. So basically what you have is a sampler nested inside an instrument rack, nested inside a drum rack. And you can do that for every kind of sample, right? So like I was kind of saying with this, let's say I want to just put in a beat, and oftentimes, like, you know, there's only so many beats in the world, and especially like for most stuff you're working on. I like that. And then, see, that's nice. So I'm like, okay, now I've got that, which normally the process of doing that is a pain in the ass in my experience. So that's just a much easier way to go about it. Using the find window is really helpful too. Typing in something like loop, even you can type in audio and you can get all the stuff that you've ever edited ever. And if you're at a loss for what you can put into your song and you have, I can just use that now. I can click on any random old thing. Some of it's gonna be really terribly, yep, some of it's gonna be really old, badly recorded vocals, which is cool. A very cool, fun thing I want you guys to hear. But you know, if you don't work with vocals a lot, this is an even better trick. Or you could do loop, and then just like scroll randomly, and then, not that. So then we just load that in, change some warp mode maybe. Maybe just quantize it. So the whole idea, right, is that you get ideas on paper as quickly as possible. So like another cool trick, right, is let's come to our MIDI thing here. Let's grab just some operator, and then I have a MIDI effect rack. It's called Basic Art Patch. Basically what that does is, MIDI effects are really underused in my opinion, but basically what it does is it will create a chord. In this case I've just done a minor triad, so it's a nothing and then a minor third and then a fifth, just like that. Then that is running into an arpeggiator, which will play up those notes at 16th note intervals, and then that is effectively locked into the key of C minor. So what that, or in this case E minor. So what that does is it means I can play any note and it's going to be in key. Which, if you don't know music theory, this can be a really powerful thing, right? Especially if you want to just like get some other random notes in there. So you're just, suddenly you have an idea, right? Maybe you don't want the arpeggiation. You can still, and it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but it sounds good, right? And that's the whole idea. You know, I actually do kind of know what I'm doing, in that I know how to make this into a chord, but if you don't, you can still just do about every 3 or 4 notes, and that will get you pretty close. So point being, like, if we wanted to just, you can seriously just put just about anything in there and it'll sound fine. Maybe. That's actually what I want to. So you can see how pretty quickly you would end up with some actual ideas. Another thing that you can have set up, like I've talked about how I have, and now we can use this exact same, we don't even have to actually make a new MIDI clip. We can just copy this one and move it over, and then grab that same scale, move it over, and now our sub is going to be the right notes as well. Great sub, right? Or if we really want to use that same clip, we can do more MIDI effects. We can grab a pitch and just pitch it down the right number of octaves. Let's turn this up a little bit. I'll turn that down. So now we've got a bass line by using that exact same MIDI. But maybe you say, Alden, you fool. How am I going to edit that MIDI now? Well, you fool, I will tell you. You can grab the MIDI from this operator once you've got all this stuff set up. Like, let's say you really want to get crazy with this. You want to, like, set up some swung eighths and do it in... You want some really off-kilter stuff. And you want to like offset your snares and like you're really going full Mr. Carmack. Like this is really your vibe. There we go. So now you want to edit this MIDI in some meaningful way, which let's make this less bad, shall we? Maybe...
You just gave it like a video game.
Yeah, you gotta have those video game vibes, man. That's the rules, that's the law, actually. So then you can, this is another fun trick, is to widen or to layer up sounds. Especially in FM, this works really well. You just make a sound that you kind of like, and then duplicate it a bunch of times, pan it out, and then change it slightly in each iteration. So you can see I'm editing the level of the first modulating oscillator there. Duplicate that again, maybe get these ones an octave higher. Duplicate it again, we'll grab a utility to keep the gain more consistent. Maybe these ones. So that's cool MIDI, right? Just by messing with MIDI effects. It's like using LFOs and stuff, but you can actually do this stuff with the MIDI in Ableton, which is awesome and really underutilized in my opinion. So what we're gonna do is we're going to record the MIDI from that, and now we can actually get all that stuff out of it. And now, if we really want to, like let's say we go back to this and we want to re-quantize it because we decided we don't want to Mr. Carmack, except we do. What we can do is you can extract the groove now of that weird messed up arpeggiator MIDI, and you can apply that groove to your drums. I like that more, but point being, you can get some cool stuff out of it. Or we could go the other way. We could extract the groove of our drums, and we could apply it to our MIDI. And then if you want to really get messy, you can... Why does that remind me of Mario Sunshine? Does anyone else? Is that what you were just thinking? That's totally the vibe. And then we've got our sub going, right? But I can really dial this sub in more, right? Like, and this is what I'm talking about with like setting it up. I set up a bunch of macros. Like if I turn all these down, you can see what I've got effectively is just a sine wave. But I have an octave up that I can dial in. I have some distortion I can dial in on it. I have even harmonics. I have odd harmonics. I have saturation.
Are the harmonics overdrives?
So the way they are done, actually, because Operator lets you draw on the waveform, so I made a parallel chain where I went in, where is it? Must be these.
Operator in standard version.
Life is a pain. I feel for you.
I wanted to make a theremin once, and it was like, you have to use Operator to make a theremin in Ableton.
Can't you buy Operator just one off?
I
think you can.
did something else instead. I took a sine
I think
wave.
so. I think you can buy it on Ableton on the website.
It wasn't exactly theremin, but I took a sine wave, and then I looped it, added an LFO, and then did some auto panning to give it that wave with like a wave punching.
Totally.
Compress it, keep it from
Thereminized it.
killing your ears.
Let's get all these kicks out of here, huh? So yeah, just like setting up stuff so that it's ready to go. Because this is all stuff that I could, if I opened up a new session, I could do it. Or I can just have it either in my template or in my user library ready to go. So I can just open it up and like... And that's just the decay time, or the sustain, basically. And then this is the decay time on all.
So when people say layered instruments, they're talking about instruments that were made in Operator.
Not necessarily, because in an instrument rack you can layer anything up. Like I could, if I wanted to, I could even do it with, you can do it with anything.
Okay. Do you use the rank function to find all the sounds that you like?
The what function?
Rank.
No.
If you right click where it says name, you can select a new column that says rank, and it will tell you how often you use something.
Oh, interesting.
What?
Neat.
Yeah, that's actually pretty cool.
That is cool.
Sampler number 1 for me.
Everybody's rank will look different depending on
Interesting. Yeah, that seems about right. Okay, so one more thing. Let's while we're just showing stuff, let's get this Super Mario Sunshine beat going over here. Actually, I just learned a better way to do this, which is not that. Cool. And we are gonna take all this stuff, drag it out, loop it. So with bass design, another cool thing you can do is when you are, so like I said, if you show up and you're not inspired, or you just want to put in some time on kind of the clerical aspect of things, when you're sound designing, instead of sound designing for a particular song, what you can do is you can essentially make what you can use as waveforms. So like stuff that is just one note. So stuff like that, where you can just take a sampler and you can load that stuff in and use that at whatever key and in whatever context you want, instead of having to make a new thing. So again, we can, and we know this is an E because I wrote it down, so we set our root key to E so that we're in key, and then we are going to be cheesy and turn this way up with impact. So now we've got something like that. And the way I made that is basically just taking like a saw wave and doing filtering and EQ modulation and distortion and then compressing all that, filtering, EQ modulation, multiband compression, just, you know, the resampling process, just taking something and running it through a bunch of effects over and over again. I will say, taking really special care to preserve this sub. Like if you isolate this below, drum roll, come on. Thank you. Wasn't it? So if you isolate it below, you can hear that sub is really well preserved. It's still a sine wave. There's very little else happening to it. So what that basically means we can do is we can take our key, our scale thing, throw it on here, and this will sound really weird, but we're going to do it anyway. We're going to just use ba-bam, ba-bam. We'll maybe just give that some sort of rhythmic motif to follow.
Maybe like speed it up. Right?
Yeah, there's some cool stuff you can do in Sampler. So what's really cool about Ableton Sampler is that it lets you FM stuff that you've loaded in. Exactly. So basically what you've done is you've given yourself one note. That
What are you
you
using as a carrier or the frequency modulation?
Sampler just has one built in. So this is just a sine. I generally either use sine or triangle. Anything else starts to sound really messy. I guess that's the move. Maybe this is all an octave too low. Maybe that's. And then if you want to really go nuts, I'm actually probably going to cut, even though I made a bunch of effort to preserve the sub, which is still important to do because FM is going to respond to that fundamental in a really important way. If you lose your fundamental, you can't ever get it back. There's just nothing to be done about it. And especially when you are starting to process effects, it's really important. And that's one of the issues with if you do something like hard distortion or granulation early in your sound design process, that's going to affect your fundamental. It's going to basically deconstruct it and give you a lot of issues further down the line. So when you are working, frequency splitting is an important tool, at least isolating the sub and doing your effects above like 100 or 150, depending, I guess, where your fundamental is. You want to make sure that your EQ cutoff is above that. Does everyone know how to frequency split? Know what I'm talking about? Sweet. So frequency splitting is exactly the jam. It is precisely the jam and nothing else. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our EQ right here, and we are putting it in an audio effect track, and then we are opening up our little chain window right here. And basically, a chain is another parallel signal of audio. So what's going into the audio effect track is one signal. Each chain is going to be that signal duplicated. So what that allows us to do is on one chain, we can high pass it at 100 hertz. On the other chain, we low pass it at 100 hertz. And it sums to be the same as the signal before it. So there's the low, there's the high, and it's all together. So the significance of that is now we can apply, like let's say, some sort of crazy auto filter thing. Like let's say we really want to just go ham on the auto filter and just ruin it. Just ruin our life with the auto filter. And the sub is unaffected. Whereas putting a bandpass before that, the sub is affected. Or something that is gonna, apply a lot of, like let's say we put a dimension expander on there, just to give it like width. That's an effect you definitely wouldn't want on your sub. So it allows you to isolate certain things. Or distortion is another thing that you don't want on your sub. So that's the main use of it. I've seen people split into 3 bands so they can affect their mids and their highs differently. I used to do that, and I ultimately found that there's not a ton of utility for me in doing so. I find that the main use for me of frequency splitting is to isolate the sub and prevent stuff from happening to it. I will say a plugin like Trash has bands built into it. So Isotope Trash, this is a great plugin. But you can multi-band it, so let's say I just want this to have a bit more character to it. I can put just saturation on the highs. So there can be some utility in targeting specific frequency ranges, like before. And then generally after you do a lot of effect processing, it's usually just wise to multiband compress something. A lot of people just use OTT for this. I find that that's a really noticeable thing. I find that it's better if you just take each sound as it comes and like, do I need to change my buffer size? What's happening here? Yeah, that'll do it. So we're gonna grab this particular. What's that? That popping is kind of annoying, but we don't have time to deal with that right now. So, c'est la vie. So you can see how A, having a sub ready to go, B, having some textures basically that are ready to go that you can load into sampler, then you can just focus on modulation that's relevant to specifically what you're doing in the track, instead of building the sub, building the texture, doing all the design. I think that probably the most common and biggest mistake I see people, especially people that want to work in really sound design intensive music, that they make is they will start a drop and they'll be like, I'm gonna design a sound for this drop. And they will open up a soft synth with a blank page and they will start building a sound that they are going to use in that song, in that section. It's not the move. And what you can do is, again, on these days when you are not making a song, you can make all of those sounds. And that has 2 effects. One is that you're not gonna burn out your valuable creative energy time because you're making these sounds during a time when you're not feeling as creative. And 2, you're not as precious with each sound individually because you're just scrolling through. If you're working on a track and you come to your drop and you spend 2 hours designing a bass patch, you're really not going to want to delete that bass patch. You're going to really want to use it in that song, even if it does not work for that song, even if it is completely mismatched to the vibe. Like right now with this, if I feel like, okay, this doesn't match the other vibe I've got going, I don't care. Like, that can just disappear. Like, I did spend 2 hours making that sound, but I did it like 3 years ago. Like, I don't care. I can put in anything else now. So just all that just to say, I would advise thinking about things in terms of setting yourself up for creativity days, and then when you are in creativity mode, getting out of your own way. Does anybody have any questions about that before I kind of move on to some more vocal processing
How do you
stuff?
save a template so when you open a new project, you have that template?
So
every
you
time?
just go to Live, Preferences, and then it is in Library? No, File folder. So it says Save Current Set as Default up here.
And whatever project you have open, it will have that as the... Okay.
Exactly. Be careful about over-setting yourself up, because you don't want to have like the same bass patch or something like that in every track, which is why the 128 racks are really useful, because it's like you can have your drum machine ready to go, but you still have 128 possible kicks loaded in that.
Yeah, so you could just switch on a dime easily.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
The one thing about 128 racks that I do want to mention is if you are collaborating with someone and you do collect all and save, it will save all 128 kicks, all 128 hi-hats, all 128 snares to your folder that you're going to send to someone. So someone's going to be like, hey, why is this project 88 gigabytes? Which is not going to be that big. But they're like, hey, my computer's full of this one collab we're working on, and I would like you to explain to me why. So what you would want to do probably is just set up a bunch of audio tracks and then grab from each individual thing and then just record.
It's like basically like stem it out.
Yeah, exactly.
If you freeze it, does it keep it from importing all that stuff?
I don't think so. And I think if you flatten it, then you've lost your ability to edit stuff within it. You would end up with just one thing. But what you can do is you can make a bunch of audio tracks that record from each individual thing, and then, once you... you would get audio files out of that. So you would just have to play your whole thing once through with something set up to record each and every sample, and then you would delete the original drum machine and then send it to someone for a collab. But that's really the only disadvantage, and it's a small one in my opinion.
Well, and I also think that that's like useful in the long run. If you've got your stuff stemmed out, then it's like, maybe you want to just add this drum bit to your set or whatever.
And it's, one thing that I've heard Culprit talk about is that at a certain point, he always stems everything out, because it just lets you, I would say, like, if I were to prioritize, like, this is how to put together a song in theory, ideally, is like, you jam out in session view, get something that you like, make a skeletal arrangement of your entire track before you start doing any detailing, get like all the motifs that you want, get the structure right, organize everything so that each part is interesting without edits, and then go in and start doing audio edits, and then once you're done with that, stem everything, and then do detailing from there. That would be, in my opinion, the way to do it. The only time I don't tend to stem drums, because sometimes I will get to the end of a song and then be like, I don't love this kick. And then if you're working in audio, that's a really sad realization, because you're like, I don't love all of these kicks, and you have to go in and replace every single one. Whereas with this, it's like, I don't love this kick, and it's like, okay, boop. Now it's different, and you can choose between any of your other kicks. Just gives you a lot more fluidity later in the process. And again, it's about getting out of your own way. Okay, so if everyone feels mostly square on that, let's go into some vocal processing stuff. We're gonna lose our Super Mario, and I'm sorry, everybody. I just don't value his contributions to the discourse. For real. Have you seen speedruns of that? Dude, speedruns of Super Mario anything are crazy. It's
ones past the 2D. None of the 3D world I've ever seen.
The Odyssey speedruns are crazy too. As we wait for this to load, we can. What are your favorite speedruns, everybody? That's good practice. I try not to play video games too, which is why I watch speedruns, because then I can watch somebody else play the video games I want to play, but very quickly. Just get it out of the way.
It saves you a lot of money.
True.
All right, so vocal processing. The number one thing that I think most people don't do when they are working with vocals is layer them up. I think that is the common thing that makes vocals sound more professional. Like, this is just something I'm working on, so it's not final or anything.
Layered as in duplicated, or layered as in some more?
So someone's singing the same thing multiple times. So I've got in this one.
Going off and it's going on. Don't hate me if I'm going off.
So those are all different takes of the same thing. So if you were to use just this main take,
Going off.
in the context of the song, we will turn off all of our multi-tracks.
Yeah, I like it when vocalists send me WAV files and then they send me Christian WAV files.
It's going off. It's going. It's going off. It's going off. Don't hate.
Like, that sounds okay, right? But if we enable all of these multi-tracks, suddenly it sounds like this.
It's going off. It's going off. Don't hate me if I ham it up.
So that is like the number one thing. And the easiest way to do that is you have your main take, dead center,
Going off.
and then you have the same exact line sung the same exact way, but a different time by the same vocalist.
Going
Hand hard left, another take, so a third take, same exact performance, same exact delivery,
Going off.
pan all the way right, and then you can start layering up.
Don't hate me. Don't hate me.
And those aren't auto-tuned at all, because that like kind of like phasey waviness makes it sound more full. I usually auto-tune the lead, but a lot of the times the duplicates I won't. And then
Don't hate me if I
and then falsetto layers and stuff like that. And then it all sums to being
It's going off. It's going on. Don't hate me if I ham it up. Ham it up.
so that's thing number one, right? The other thing that people do a lot with vocals is when especially if you're used to working in electronic music, you tend to do fewer things a lot. So you compress once, but you compress the hell out of it. And you EQ once or twice, but you're really targeted and really precise, and you cut out a lot, and you're very like direct and intense with your processing. And that's not how you do vocals basically at all. With vocals, you do iterative, subtle processing. So if we're looking at the lead take here, and I'll turn off everything after it. We'll go step by step, right? I'm gonna leave the auto-tune on because I am embarrassed. But it's called being a human person. Everyone's just used to auto-tune now. So
Going off.
that is just the raw signal out of my microphone. Granted, I have a $1,200 microphone, so that helps a lot. And just briefly while we're talking about it, some recording practices. Basically, long and short of it is, the quieter the vocalist is, the closer they want to be to the microphone. So if they're really quiet, you want them like right up on it, because that will give you the most depth to the voice, because when someone sings quieter, they lose a lot of the boom in their voice. Whereas if you're talking really loudly or singing really loudly, you end up with a lot more resonance. Much more of that deep sound escapes from your voice. So what you're trying to get is roughly the same frequency balance from a soft vocal as you would from a loud vocal. So in tracks where my performance is more dynamic, I will be singing quietly really close, and then as I get louder, I'll get further away. You don't want loud vocals close to the microphone. Does anyone know what the proximity effect is? Basically, as you get closer to the microphone, if I'm talking at the same volume, you can hear the low end starts to really build up. As you get closer to the microphone, you get more boominess out of your vocals. And it's definitely happened to me before where I record something and it is so low end heavy that there's no amount of EQing. Again, with vocal processing, you have to be subtle. There's no amount of EQing that can fix it. So finding the right distance and then maintaining the right distance if you're recording is really important. Generally, it's like that. If you're singing at like a normal volume, it's like hand width right there. If you have someone that's like an R&B singer and it's super quiet, like, ah, right up on there. If you have someone that is like belting, always further away. Another couple recording misconceptions, don't record in a bathroom, please. Like, if the more reverb that the room has, the more upset you're going to be in your life. If you don't have a room, like, you can just check. That is a good indication that you are, that flutter echo is a good indication that your room is not great. If you are really in a tight spot, you can literally put a blanket over your head between yourself and just put that around your microphone. That's the cheapest vocal booth, and as long as it's either you or someone that doesn't care, it'll do. They also sell these like mic shields that are like, it's basically like foam padding in a little semicircle behind the mic. I use one of those even though I have my studio acoustically treated. It's just nice. And also, generally, the less treated your room is, the more in the middle of the room you want your mic. You want it far away from the walls so it doesn't catch as much reverb. So all of that is just good recording practices. Ideally, if you're doing the same take multiple ways, try to remember, okay, this is the distance I was. Try to get your preamp setting. I've written on Sharpie with my, on my audio interface, the input level of the microphone that I use, so that it's the same for every take, because the volume of the preamp is going to make it sound different, and you're going to be able to tell from take to take, especially if you're coming back later to record and fix specific things. You want to have your settings the same. You can even write down on a notepad, this is how I recorded this. You want to have the distance the same. You might take note of that, and you want to have ideally the same person doing the same performance. So back to processing, right? We're good on time? We're good on time. So first and foremost, high pass, that's just typical, right? Like, that's for anything that's not a bass. You want to high pass it at like 100 hertz. That's just, there's not a lot under there anyway, but, and then there's just a little bit of a dip right around, my voice specifically tends to always have a little bit of buildup right around like 520. And you'll find that certain vocalists, just the way that their mouths and throats and chests are shaped, there's just going to be resonance buildups. It's like any room that's not treated. You can't acoustically treat the inside of someone's body, so there's just going to be some resonances that poke out. And it generally tends to be in the low mid-range. So this is a gain rider plugin, which could be very easily replaced with an RMS compressor, because basically all it's doing is once it crosses the threshold, it's just reducing the volume.
There's things on an audio interface that can control that too, right? Like if you, instead of having the digital.
I don't know about that. I haven't ever experienced that. You could, in theory, just be adjusting the volume, because what the gain rider is meant to imitate is, back before there was compression, people would literally in real time be adjusting the slider, like riding the vocal to adjust down when the singer got louder and up when the singer got quieter. So this is meant to mimic that. This particular plugin, it's super cheap and I like it a lot. It's called Outlaw, and the reason I use it is because whatever algorithm it uses is just very natural sounding. I think they have just made it more randomized so it sounds a bit more like someone is riding the fader. But like I said, if you wanted to do the same thing with any old compressor and just, yeah, you could just set it to RMS and have like a longer attack and a longer release and like, you know, like.
Going off, it's going on. Don't hate me if I.
Nice auto tune there, bud.
Going off.
So that would do the trick just about as well. So the first thing you want to do is you want to eliminate part of the frequency that you don't want, and then you want to get the average level right. This is what I'm talking about with iterative processing. Once you get the average right, then you can do some multiband compression, which will respond now more evenly because you've gotten your average volume. You know, like this stuff over here, you can see in the waveform, is louder than this stuff right here. But this Outlaw is going to even that out. So now, and a lot of the heavy lifting is done by a multiband compressor, which is actually why I want a new one. The Ableton one is not the best in the world. I really want Pro MB from FabFilter, and I missed their sale, and I'm not bitter about it. You're bitter about it.
Talk to Josh.
Josh?
I think so.
Sick.
I'll part of the stuff we got.
I'll bug him.
Yeah.
I'll bug him. Thank you. But you can hear.
It's going up.
When you work on a multiband dynamic plugin, do you work on the input side first or the output side first?
Generally what I do is I generally don't work with input very much at all. I just bring the threshold down to where
Don't hate me if I had me.
So I actually am not really doing much with this particular multiband compressor.
Don't hate me if I had.
But you can hear it evens it out quite a lot. Another thing is, let's say you did record, and this is going to be so blasphemous what I'm about to do, but let's say you did record and you were just way too close to the mic, and this is your life now. What you can do is you can target with a multiband compressor. You can solo this band, and you can find. And like that stuff is too loud. You can just grab that specifically. And so even this is now being pretty much fixed by that. Not entirely, but pretty much. And I also kind of can't tell because the speakers are behind me, but hopefully you guys can. So with multiband compression, again with vocals, you kind of want to be iterative about it. You want to get your broad strokes right, and then if you're like, okay, maybe I'm looking at it in, let's just do this as a thought experiment. Maybe you're looking at your vocal in a spectral analyzer. I really like this one.
Don't hate me if I had middle.
I mean, that's very even. But if there were, again, we're going to blaspheme.
Don't hate me if I had middle,
So you can hear now, okay, we start seeing, maybe we could blur this a bit.
You could raise the gain.
So now we can start to see, man, that's weird how there's a bump right there. I wonder how that happened. But what you can do is you can see, okay, well, that's between 500 and 1.6. So we will take this and we will set it to 500. We'll set this to 1.6. And then we can tame that specifically. And we've more or less eliminated the issue from this.
don't hate me if I had middle.
Not entirely, but
don't hate me if I.
but now it's pretty much gone, right? It's if you have, and most microphones will give you some grief. Most microphones, even mine. I mean, even mine is not flat response, and especially my room is not perfectly treated. So there's going to be resonances, and there's stuff that you will want to attenuate. The reason you don't want to do that with an EQ is another good option would be an adaptive EQ. But the reason you don't do that with a straight up EQ is because in vocals, every single harmonic matters. Because people, it's the uncanny valley, basically. People know what a human voice sounds like. If you start cutting out huge chunks of the frequency in the human voice, someone's gonna be like, what is happening? Why does this voice sound so weird? Which is why you don't, you know, like,
It makes it sound brittle.
yeah, you don't start like cutting out.
Don't hate me.
Like in most sounds that would be fine, right? Like in electronic sounds, you can do that without too much issue, but on vocals, it's like, bad news bears.
I think you never go more than 6 decibels on the EQ unless it's popping or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like, you know, maybe you do have one frequency that's like, maybe someone was playing the whistle in the background of your vocal recording. It was just, maybe you do need to attenuate that. Or,
Isn't there like a de-esser?
so yes, de-essers are a thing. The other, so with, let's find an S actually.
And it's going,
So if scone, if you so like once we start compressing, right? Like let's say, I'll put gain reduction on and just really blow it the fuck up. Sorry, can I curse? Is that fine?
Sure.
Sorry about that. Let's go ahead. So you can hear that S is now getting pretty upset with me. I'm gonna exit automation mode. So a de-esser, all it's going to do is it's going to identify stuff in a particular frequency range, and it is either going to adjust the volume of that particular frequency range down when it exceeds a certain threshold, or it will adjust the volume of the entire signal down when the stuff in that frequency range exceeds a specific threshold. So either you can get a de-esser plugin, or you can just go to where every time there's an S, and you can clip that and turn it down. And that's going to sound better every time. So I would say if you're deciding whether or not to buy a de-esser, I would just say don't. Just get into the habit of adjusting your S's manually.
And then like fading. So
Exactly. So like we would, yeah, good call. So like if we adjusted this down, we would fade the edges a little bit just to make sure that it is smooth. It's going on. Don't hate me. You can also, I mean, whether or not you keep the breaths in is up to you. But if you're doing the same vocal performance in a lot of things, you can pretty easily just do this. Also, a fun thing is you can do multiple fades at once now, and I can't remember how because it's.
He's also
that's a time saver too. If you can do multiple fades at once. I don't know if can you do that in standard?
no, and
Or
I
in
don't
a-
think, and you probably can't do it in 9. This
You
is-
can't do it in 9.
This is 10.
That is a 10 feature.
And I can't remember how to do it at all, so that's fun. Oh, it's Shift Command
You
F.
have to
But
select it on the I don't know what that thing's called.
On the
yeah,
thing.
You don't have that on the side anymore.
What?
No, it's
the
not.
future is here, my friend.
Oh no.
Oh no! Not the future. I'm not ready. Okay. So, what am I talking about? Okay, let's get back into the processing, right? So we cut out the fat, we did some auto-tuning, we did some gain riding, aka RMS compression, we did some multiband compression that evens out our spectrum, we did some more that we don't need anymore, but in theory we could. Now we are going to compress. This is Gain Reduction by Joey Sturgis. It's a plugin that I really, really like. It is pretty much the gold standard for vocal compressors. If you are buying one plugin to do everything, the default setting is way too high. So if you buy it and you're like, why is this so compressed? Turn the slay knob right down. They start with it right there, like it's some sort of something crazy, like the settings they start you with. I mean, it doesn't sound bad, but for a lot of purposes, it's just too much. It's got some nice coloration in it. Again, if you were doing this without a specific to vocals compressor, what you would do at this point is you would get a peak compressor, still probably a slower attack, slower release, and this is just going to catch individual things that are too loud. So you had your RMS compressor earlier that's responding to the overall average volume. Now you've got your peak compressor that's going to catch individual things that pop too high. And then we're going to do some more EQ just to kind of color it up. Now that we've leveled everything out, we can do some of the finer detailing. So we're getting there. Oh, I meant to turn this stuff off. Now it's going off. Ha ha ha. Soothe is what I use instead of a de-esser because it is magic. It is a magical plugin for magical people, and if you have like infinite money, you should get it. It's more expensive than I wish it were because I want to recommend it to everybody. But what Soothe is an adaptive FFT resonance reducer. So it will analyze the signal as it goes in, and it will what it does is effectively like EQing down. It's like an adaptive EQ, but it's way more transparent and way more fast response, and it's just amazing. So if I press delta here, you can actually hear what it's removing. And it's all this mic noise, all this resonance from the room and all that stuff. I have two of them running. So this one's more targeting just the S's, like if we listen to the delta on this. You can hear that. Soothe is amazing. It's an amazing plugin, especially for vocals. I would buy it 10 more times easily. It's amazing.
You only use it for vocals though?
No, I use it for a lot of stuff. It's good in some amounts on basically everything, especially if you're designing a sound and you end up having like a really harsh resonance in it. Soothe will just catch it. And especially if you're doing something that's really long and has a lot of modulations, like a really long bass sound that has all sorts of crazy things going on, and at this one particular moment it goes like and just gets a little sharp. If you just put Soothe on it, it will only trigger when it gets to that part. It is magic. It's like mixed cheating. It's so good. It feels unfair. Oh, that's why, because there's two groups. Got it. What's even on here? Okay. So I have skipped a step, which is not the end of the world. But on the vocal group, because there's all these,
It's going off.
I have a glue compressor to kind of get all the vocals in alignment with each other. It just kind of levels out the volume of the overall thing and blends them all into one sound. And then I have another Soothe.
Going off.
This one's really not doing much, but it tends to help. And then I have, a lot of the times, especially historically, people will use sends to do like vocal reverb and stuff, where you would just send it to like a return track like this. I like to do basically the same thing as doing a send. We talked about audio effect tracks, how you can create parallel chains. So on this one, the reverb is all the way up. It's got a little bit of delay on it, and then there's an EQ. And it's just, it allows you to like mix your reverb more. Allows you to do more with your reverb instead of just throwing a plugin on. And it allows you to kind of EQ it out of the way of the main part of your vocal. Like,
Going off. It's going on.
okay. And then we go to our other stuff. We talked about Soothe. Then I use Trash. Most of the time, a professional vocal, especially when you want it to cut through on an electronic or pop mix, is going to have a lot of saturation in the very, very top end. So this band is as high as it will let me take it in Trash, this stuff. And it is just being saturated. So without it, it sounds like this, or with less. But basically, it's just fizzing up that very top end. And the advantage of that, you'll actually, hopefully you'll be able to hear it. It might not sound on these speakers.
It's going.
Nope. Forgot to unsolo it. Isn't that amazing? What a crazy effect. Come on, man. Don't do me like this.
It's going.
There we go. So here is without,
It's going off.
and then here's with.
It's going off.
It just makes it pop, makes it sparkle, and makes it cut through the mix much more. Just that little bit of saturation on the very top end. Okay, I'm about to wrap it up here. And then last but not least, we have our trusty dimension expander. This is from Xfer. If you have Serum or Serum Effects specifically, you have this. And basically what it is a, it has 4 delays, and they go out to the sides, and then 2 of them are phase inverted. So the mono signal, no matter how much I turn it up, and this is actually a fun thing to demonstrate. We'll just grab, what will we grab? We'll grab a vocal and we'll turn off the reverb. We'll play this.
Going off.
Turn this just right up, right? Like,
Going off. It's going off.
and that's a really intense effect, but when we put it in mono,
Going off.
no effect whatsoever.
It's going off.
Even though all of this like crazy width,
Going off.
I turn on mono and
It's going off.
it's as though it's not happening at all. That's really good for vocals because it allows the lead to still cut through. And if you're doing just one take, like a lot of this, let me dial that back in actually, because otherwise it's gonna sound ridiculous. But like there's a rapped bit earlier in this song, and like with rap, you don't necessarily layer up 5, takes of the same rapper rapping the same thing 5 times. You could, and maybe that would sound good, so I might try that now that I've said that out loud. But, if you're working with a single take, it's you know, if you put chorus on your vocals, that's going to be really obvious. If you put reverb on your vocals, that's going to be really obvious. If you put like a ping pong delay and do the Haas effect, that's going to be really obvious, and you're going to get phasing. And again, any kind of that stuff that you introduce to vocals, people are so much more sensitive to it because they know what a human voice sounds like. But Dimension Expander, you get a lot of width.
I was on 287 yesterday when it came to me. I never said the things I knew I meant to say. Sue me. I guess I'm under pressure, so I had.
You can get a ton of width out of it, but then once you put it in mono, again.
I was on 287 yesterday when it came to me.
And there's some other effects on there that are not that. But point being, the Dimension Expander is completely transparent in mono, and that is very, very important. Okay, so that just about wraps it up. The only other thing that I would want to talk about is in a lot of songs, the reverb or delay will only trigger on the last syllable of a vocal. So like this reverb, what we could do if we wanted to, and it might clean it up or it might not work for this particular application, but we could automate it so that the reverb only comes in when it's on the last syllable of the vocal. So like, and a lot of the times, if you listen to professional quality vocal mixes, I'll turn. So like, it'll be really dry, and then we need to unsolo this.
Going off, and it's going on.
So like, just to avoid cluttering up that vocal range, if you have a reverb that's bleeding out over everything, it will overlap. And so a lot of the times if you're listening, you'll hear that there is, like if there is a delay, it'll be mixed pretty far back, and it'll only be on the last syllable or note that the singer did. So those are just some vocal processing tips for everybody. I think that's about all I really want to cover, unless anybody has any questions.
I have a question. It's not. If it's not relevant to what this is, that's totally fine. But so in class you do like the loop where you will modulate it, and then
Like scrolling through the.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can mess with it, and then you pull it out, and it's got.
You want me to just briefly?
Yeah,
just
you
go into that?
because it's super useful.
Where is that?
I imagine these guys will find.
Yeah, that is really fun. Where is it? Is it in? Oh, it's called Here We Go Again now, but I can't remember. Here it is. So basically what he's talking about is in Ableton and in Ableton 10, there is this functionality where you can scroll through a clip of audio on the session view instead of having to scroll into it. So let's see, I did this somewhere.
Session view being the other.
Or arrangement view, sorry. As opposed to zooming into the clip and doing it down here. Where is it? B and basses, these are them. So basically what you can do is you can either just scroll through it. So I'm doing Shift, Alt, and...
You can't do that in 9.
Correct. So like you can... So basically if I'm looping this... So that's one way to scroll through stuff. The advantage of that being if I take something like... Not that. I know that there's a clip of just the original thing, but maybe I'll just have to make it again. We will go to our first drop. We will grab a render of our bass things before the mixer. Here, I'll just do it to a drop that already has it so we can start stacking up the fat stacks. Basses, pre-effects, and then we are just going to record. So I'm taking my whole bass channel, my whole bass group, and I'm just going to record it to one audio track now. So now we are going to grab this, and we are going to make another new audio track, which is grabbing audio from what we just did, which is 19 audio. We're going to record, and we are going to loop this, stretch the hell out of it, and we are going to scroll through it in texture mode and just start messing up our lives. We'll actually just grab something where something's always happening. So we are going to start recording here. Maybe we'll actually just grab a really small section. So now we've got all that stuff that we can just use later, and that I wouldn't say was the best example of it, but all of this stuff was generated that way. Like all those little edits there, you know, if we wanted to pop in one of these, what we can do is we can shove that in the right time bracket, and then we can use that scrolling thing. You can do the shift option, and like you can find something else that's going to work in this same slot of this.
Here we go again. Here we go again. Here we go. Here we go again. Here we go.
And then just keep scrolling through until you find
Here we go. Here we go.
There we go.
Here we go again.
Like that's kind of cool. So then we have
Here we go again. Here we go again.
like all this stuff was made through just this same technique. So if I bring this stuff over, it is just exactly what I was doing there, where you...
So you're making samples, and you're making wavetables of samples, and then you're changing the wavetable.
So that's just all the earlier drop. I took the whole bass group, rendered it to audio, and then just started messing with texture, stretching the hell out of it, switching between warping modes, and then basically you can take all that because it has the same texture and character as your bass, and you can start working it in as edits. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks, everybody.